Hello and welcome back. Where we last left off, Jim Hawkins took control of the Hispaniola with one other man on board by the name of Israel Hands. I've got a bad feeling this is not going to end well. Well, let's see what happens. So you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 26. Israel Hands. The wind serving us to a desire now hauled into the west. We could run so much the easier from the northeast corner of the island to the mountain of the north inlet, only as we had no power to anchor, and dared not beach her till the tide had flowed a good deal farther. Time hung on our hands. The coxswain told me how to lay the ship to. After a good many trials I succeeded, and we both sat in silence over another meal. "Captain," said he at length, with that same uncomfortable smile, "here's my only shipmate, O'Brien. Suppose you was to heave him overboard. I ain't particular as a rule, and I don't take no blame for settling his hash. But I don't reckon him ornamental, now, don't you? I'm not strong enough, and I don't like the job." "And there he lies for me," said I. "This here's an unlucky ship, the Hispaniola, Jim," he went on, blinking. "There's a power of men have been killed in this Hispaniola. A sight of poor seamen dead and gone since you and me took ship to Bristol. I never seen such dirty luck, not I. There was this here O'Brien. Now, he's dead, ain't he?" "Well, now, I'm no scholar, and you're a lad as can read and figure. And to put it straight, do you take it as a dead man is dead for good, or do he come alive again? You can kill the body, Mr. Hands, but not the spirit. You must know that already," I replied. "O'Brien there is in another world, and may be watching us." "Ah," says he. "Well, that's unfortunate. Appears as if killing parties was a waste of time." "How so? Never. Spirits don't reckon for much by what I've seen. I'll chance it with the spirits, Jim." "Now you've spoken up free, and I'll take it kind if you'd step down into that there cabin and get me shiver me timbers, I can't hit the name on it. Will you get me a bottle of wine, Jim? This here brandy's too strong for my head." Now the coxswain's hesitation seemed to be unnatural, and as for the notion of his preferring wine to brandy, I entirely disbelieved it. The whole story was a pretext. He wanted me to leave the deck. So much was plain, but with what purpose I could in no way imagine. His eyes never met mine. They kept wandering to and fro, up and down, and with a look to the sky, and with a flitting glance upon the dead O'Brien. All the time he kept smiling, and putting his tongue out in the most guiltily embarrassed manner, so that the child could have told that he was bent on some deception. I was prompt with my answer, however, for I saw where my advantage lay, and that with a fellow so densely stupid I could easily conceal my suspicions to the end. "Some wine," I said. "Far better. Will you have white or red?" "Well, I reckon it's about the blessed same to me, shipmate," he replied. "So it's strong and plenty of it. What's the odds?" "All right," I answered. "I'll bring you port, Mr. Hands, but I'll have to dig for it." With that I scuttled down the companion with all the noise I could, slipped off my shoes, ran quietly along the sparred gallery, mounted the forecastle ladder, and popped my head out of the fore companion. I knew he would not expect to see me there, yet I took every precaution possible, and certainly the worst of my suspicions proved to be true. He had risen from his position to his hands and knees, and though his leg obviously hurt him pretty sharply when he moved, for I could hear him stifle a groan, yet it was at a good rattling rate that he trailed himself across the deck. In half a minute he had reached the port scuppers and picked out of a coil of rope a long knife, or rather a short dirk, discolored to the hilt with blood. He looked upon it for a moment, thrusting forth his underjaw, tried the point upon his hand, and then hastily concealing it in the bosom of his jacket, trundled back again into his old place against the bulwark. This was all that I required to know. Israel could move about. He was now armed, and if he had been at so much trouble to get rid of me, it was plain that I was meant to be the victim. What he would do afterwards, whether he would try to crawl right across the island from North Inlet to the camp among the swamps, or whether he would fire Long Tom, trusting that his own comrades might come first to help him, was of course more than I could say. Yet I felt sure that I could trust him in one point, since in that our interests jumped together, and that was in the disposition of the schooner. We both desired to have her stranded safe enough, in a sheltered place, and so that when time came, she could be got off again with as little labor and danger as might be, and until it was done, I considered what my life would certainly be spared. While I was thus turning the business over in my mind, I had not been idle with my body. I had stolen back to the cabin, slipped once more into my shoes, and laid my hand at the random on a bottle of wine, and now, with this for an excuse, I made my reappearance on the deck. Hans lay as I had left him, all fallen together in a bundle, and with his eyelids lowered as though he were too weak to bear the light. He looked up, however, at my coming, knocked the neck of the bottle, like a man who had done the same thing often, and took a good swig, with his favourite toast of "Here's luck." Then he lay quiet for a while, and then, pulling out a stick of tobacco, begged me to cut him a quid. "Cut me a junk of that," says he, "for I haven't no knife, and hardly strength enough. So be as I had. Ah, Jim, I reckon I've missed stays. Cut me a quid, as likely be the last, lad, for I'm for my long home, and no mistake." "Well," said I, "I'll cut you some tobacco. But if I was you and thought myself so badly, I would go to my prayers like a Christian man." "Why?" said he. "Now you tell me why." "Why?" I cried. "You were asking me just now about the dead. You've broken your trust. You've lived in sin and lies and blood. There's a man you killed lying at your feet this moment, and you ask me why. For God's mercy, Mr. Hans, that's why." I spoke with a little heat, thinking of the bloody dirk he had hidden in his pocket and designed, in his ill thoughts, to end me with. He, for his part, took a great draught of wine and spoke with the most unusual solemnity. "For 30 years, he said, I've sailed the seas and seen good and bad, better and worse, fair weather and foul, provisions running out, knives going, and what not. Well, now I tell you, I've never seen good come o' goodness yet. Him as strikes first is my fancy. Dead man don't bite. Them's my views. Amen, so be it. And now you look here," he added, suddenly changing his tone. "We've had about enough of this foolery. The tide's making good enough by now. You just take my orders, Captain Hawkins, and we'll sail slap in and be done with it." All told, we had scarce 2 miles to run, but the navigation was delicate. The entrance to this northern anchorage was not only narrow and shoal, but lay east and west, so that the schooner must be nicely handled to be got in. I think it was a good, prompt subaltern, and I am very sure that Hans was an excellent pilot, for we went about and dodged in, shaving the banks with a certainty and a neatness that were a pleasure to behold. Scarcely had we passed the heads before the land road closed around us. The shores of North Inlet were as thickly wooded as those of the southern anchorage, but the space was longer and narrower, and more like what in truth it was, the estuary of a river. Right before us in the southern end we saw the wreck of a ship in the last stages of dilapidation. It had been a great vessel of 3 masts, but had lain so long exposed to the injuries of the weather that it was hung about with great webs of dripping seaweed, and on the deck of it shore brushes had taken root, and now flourished thick with flowers. It was a sad sight, but it showed us that the anchorage was calm. "Now," said Hans, "look there. There's a bid for to beach a ship in. Fine flat sand, never a cat's paw, trees all round of it, and flowers a-bowing like a guarding on that old ship. And once beach," I inquired, "how shall we get her off again?" "Why so?" he replied. "You take a line ashore there on the other side at low water, and take a turn about one of them big pines. Bring it back, take a turn round the capstan, and lie to for the tide. Come high water, all hands take a pull along upon the line, and off she comes as sweet as nature. Now, boy, you stand by. We're near the bit now, and she's too much way on her. Starboard a little, so steady, starboard. Larboard a little, steady, steady." So he issued his commands, which I breathlessly obeyed, till all of a sudden he cried, "Now, my hearty, luff!" And I put the helm hard up, and the Hispaniola swung round rapidly and ran stem on for the low wooded shore. The excitement of these last maneuvers had somewhat interfered with the watch I had kept hitherto sharply enough upon the coxswain. Even then I was still so much interested, waiting for the ship to touch, that I had quite forgot the peril that hung over my head, and stood craning over the starboard bulwarks and watching the ripples spreading wide before the bows. I might have fallen without a struggle for my life, had not a sudden disquietude seized upon me and made me turn my head. Perhaps I heard a creak, or seen his shadow moving with the tail of my eye. Perhaps it was an instinct like a cat's. But sure enough, when I looked around, there was Hans already halfway towards me with the dirk in his right hand. We must both have cried out aloud when our eyes met, but while mine was the shrill cry of terror, his was a roar of fury like a charging bull's. At the same instant he threw himself forward, and I leapt sideways towards the bows. As I did so, I left hold of the tiller, which sprang sharp to leeward. I think this saved my life, for it struck Hans across the chest and stopped him, for the moment, dead. Before he could recover, I was safe out of the corner where he had me trapped, with all the deck to dodge about. Just forward of the mainmast, I stopped, drew a pistol from my pocket, took a cool aim, though he had already turned and was once more coming directly at me, and drew the trigger. The hammer fell, but there followed neither flash nor sound. The priming was useless with sea-water. I cursed myself for my neglect. Why had not I, long before, reprimmed and reloaded my only weapons? Then I should not have been, as now, a mere fleeing sheep before this butcher. Wounded as he was, it was wonderful how fast he could move, his grizzled hair tumbling over his face, and his face